This portrait is hiding something. Upon first glance, does anything look off about it to you? This portrait of Isabella de Medici was on the verge of getting let go from the Carnegie Museum Collection because it was presumed to be a modern fake. The curators agreed. The facial style of this portrait simply didn't match that of a Renaissance master. It turns out that this painting was historically airbrushed. A rogue art restorer from the 1800s was having trouble selling it, so he decided to make it more appealing to a Victorian audience. He smoothed her face, made her nose, lips, and hands more delicate, and went on his way. The Carnegie team discovered his handiwork with X-ray imagery and restored the painting to its original version, revealing the true Isabella de Medici underneath. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Royalty Now, where we bring you face-to-face with figures from the past. Today, we're exploring a question that has followed me ever since I started doing facial reconstructions of past figures. What are old portraits hiding? Why do so many faces from the past look alike? And the most important question to me, do these portraits look like the real person they were meant to depict? These old portraits are most definitely glossing over the truth. So let's get to the bottom of what they're hiding. I thought a fun way to illustrate this would be to place myself into portraits from three eras: the English Tudor era, the late 1600s early modern period, and 1700s French portraiture, and explore how the beauty standards of the time changed my own face. Portraiture throughout the ages has shifted and evolved a lot. Ancient Egypt offers us stylized, almost geometric statues of its rulers. Ancient Greece moved us towards naturalistic portraits, but focused on beauty and form. And then, ancient Rome perfected the imperfections, depicting its people with all the things that truly make us all unique. But with the fall of the Roman Empire, as with many innovations, portrait art all but disappeared in the Middle Ages. If there was an image of an individual, it was usually paid for by the church, and was meant to be religious and symbolic, not realistic, so the field remained stagnant for several hundred years. It wasn't until the early 1400s that portraiture as an art form reemerged, primarily in the Netherlands and Germany. Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait was revolutionary for including both symbols and a realistic depiction of the people he painted. And you can even see a reflection in the circular mirror behind them. Albrecht Dürer's self-portrait also broke all previous tradition. He's painted straight on, making eye contact with the viewer. This new style was almost intimate, but also evoked the religious undertones of medieval art. Still, it was truly daring and is almost intimidating. Monarchs all over Europe began to stand up and take notice of these innovations, and they began to commission their own portraits. Because of their skill in portraits specifically, anyone who was anyone had a German or Netherlandish court painter employed. But these portraits weren't just meant to be personal images viewed by family and friends. These were meant to project power, beauty, and the very values of their culture. There are a few questions you can ask yourself when viewing old portraits that can help decode their messages, and perhaps even find out what they are hiding. First, what symbols did the artist add to accurately convey the subject's role? For instance, how can we tell the difference between a portrait of a lady-in-waiting versus a portrait of a queen? The finery of their dress, the objects they hold in their hands, and the scale of the painting are all clues that the artist is giving us. The second question is, where was the portrait intended to hang, and who is the audience? For instance, this portrait of Empress Sissi, which hung privately in her husband's study, is very different in tone from this official portrait of her as Empress. Images meant for public consumption will always have a different energy. The third question is, what were the personal aspirations of the artist? The famous Spanish painter Francisco Goya worked as the court painter for the Spanish royal family in the late 18th century, a really rocky time in Spain's political history. Many modern historians view his unflattering portraits of the royal family as a satire on their incompetence. This is a good example of the artist maybe having clashing intentions with the people they're painting. And lastly, the thing that makes the most difference in the actual faces of these people. What did the sitter and their culture consider beautiful? There's an overarching commonality between portraits in all of history, and that is they are always a little retouched. It's similar to professional headshots today. While the goal isn't to alter any actual features, there are always hairs that are smoothed, blemishes that are removed, and wrinkles that are blurred just a little bit. Unfortunately, same as today, youth and beauty were still prized in portraits of women throughout every century. We can illustrate this with comparisons from after the invention of photography. This is a portrait of Queen Victoria in 1859. Before photography, we would have all had to agree that this painting was the most accurate look at the Queen, and just take it at face value. But this is a photograph from just a year later. Sure, she looks like herself, but better. This is what I mean when I say that portraits were the historical version of a photo filter. I'll show you how I inserted myself into portraits from 3 centuries to see how they would have filtered me. First, let's start with the Tudor era. Tudor era beauty was all about piety. The Tudors thought that inner beauty directly reflected outer beauty, so their portraits almost retain the religious style from earlier centuries. You often see Tudor women looking away from the viewer, almost conveying a sense of virtue or a certain shyness. Every era I researched really desired one thing from its noblewomen, and that was a pale complexion, since it indicated not having to work in the sun. A nice ghostly complexion meant that a woman had nothing but her beauty to care about, unlike the common woman. And the Tudors certainly took pale to an extreme. Their portraits are almost colorless. They really lack depth. Ideally, you'd have light hair and eyes to contribute to this effect even further. An open face with high, thin eyebrows and a high forehead was considered desirable. Again, making sure you look as pious as possible. So I've inserted myself into a Tudor portrait, but I made sure to first maintain all of my real facial features, not tweaking anything yet to Tudor standards. You can see how I look a little out of place, right? Even though the style matches the portrait, somehow my features look foreign. I'm a little too angular. Maybe my nose and lips are a little larger than what the Tudors would like. So let's say I'm a Tudor noblewoman who commissioned this portrait of myself. Now I want to ask the artist to make a few corrections. I want smoother, more pious-looking lips with a stylized wavy shape. I want to be more symmetrical and smoothed out. Let's smooth my brows, smooth the contours of my face, and maybe make my nose a little smaller. And this is what we end up with. Do I recognize it as myself? Sure, mostly. But does it look much more like the other portraits of the time? It definitely does. This is how Tudors would change themselves. And then if I were really unlucky, my portrait would be copied by a less skilled painter and left to rot in someone's attic for 300 years. Do you see how easy it is to go from point A, I'm fully recognizable, to point B, it would be hard to even imagine me in real life? Now let's fast forward 100 years to the late 1600s, the early modern kind of Queen Anne era of portraiture. We instantly see in portraits from this time that we've moved away from the religious undertones. We're now making some scandalous eye contact with the viewer. The ideal woman at this time was more rounded than centuries before. She was full-figured, her face was oval, she had a high brow and a light double chin. Huge, round eyes were very attractive, particularly when they were brown or dark blue. There should be a full mouth with a rounded lower lip and a delicately curving upper lip. The cheeks and lips should also be naturally flushed and healthy-looking. So here I am. I'm an English noblewoman in the court of Queen Anne who was commissioned a portrait. Once again, I've maintained all of my original features, but they don't fit the beauty standard. I feel like I'm too angular for this time period. So what I would have my portrait artist do is make my jawline more rounded, and my neck and jaw a little thicker because I look too skinny. My eyes look way too small, so let's make them huge and heavily lidded. Oh, and maybe give my nose that noble, curved appearance like Queen Anne's. Perfect. This is the secret to how people in the late 1600s were modifying themselves for public consumption. Everything is more voluptuous. Everything is more rounded. Now, let's go to the French court in the 1700s, one of my personal favorite eras of portraiture. In every era, what was fashionable and beautiful was usually established by the queen. Courtiers would race to copy the queen's new hair or the queen's new style of dress. There's no era that better exemplifies this phenomenon than late 1700s France. If you were a European noblewoman wanting to look beautiful in a portrait, you wanted to make sure you looked just like Marie Antoinette. Now in fashion was a slim, oval face with a rounded chin, large, almost drooping eyes, and small, sculpted noses. We've moved from flowing curls to fluffy, powdered wigs. Also in vogue is a deep flush on the cheeks and lips. The standards of this era were all about proportion and having symmetrical features. The goal was to not be too much of anything, not too fat, not too thin, not too tall or not too short, etc. So I've placed myself faithfully into a French portrait. I do feel like I look more natural in this era than others so far, but I definitely still tell my painter to make a few corrections. Definitely much larger eyes. And I want that beautiful slim oval shape of Marie Antoinette's face. Let's make my nose and lips more sculpted. And I think my forehead looks out of proportion, so let's reduce that as well. These are some of the ways that women would be stylized and historically airbrushed in late 1700s France. One of my favorite things about portraits of Marie Antoinette is that we actually can compare them to her real face, her death mask taken immediately after her execution. It reveals the truth hidden behind her regal image, that even she did not live up to the standards set by her portraiture. Her nose is not as chiseled, nor are her eyes as large. Her lips aren't as stylized, and her face is more round than the soft oval she liked to show off in her portraits. Ultimately, we will never have a photograph of what our favorite figures from the past really looked like. But as I aim to recreate the faces of the figures on this channel, I know I can look through this lens, how people from the past tinkered with their own image. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you for the next video.